Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how to run a couple of simple checks to check that the regulator rectifier and the charging system in your motorcycle are working as they should. So the first test I'm going to do is I'm going to use a multimeter to measure the voltage across the terminals of the battery. I'm going to turn on the motorcycle, I'm going to set it running, and I'm going to check that the battery is being charged as I would expect. If it's not charging as I would expect, then I can turn my attention to the possibility that the regulator rectifier is not working properly, or it's malfunctioning, or possibly that the stator is not working. But the second test we can complete using, again, with the multimeter set to measure the current from the negative terminal of the battery while the motorcycle is not running. So we will check the current that is being drawn from the battery when the motorcycle is not running, while the regulator rectifier is connected in the circuit or connected into the wiring loom, and then we're going to check how that current changes when we disconnect the regulator rectifier from the wiring loom. Now, the reason for this second test is just to check that the regulator rectifier is working properly as a diode. Lastly, I'm going to remove the regulator rectifier from the motorcycle. I'm going to use my multimeter set to read for continuity, and I'm going to I'm going to read all the pins that are in the connector on the regulator rectifier, and I'm going to be able to read that the circuits in the regulator rectifier are working as they should. So let's begin. So the first test that I can do to check that the regulator rectifier is working as it should is I can hook up a multimeter, which is just here. This is my multimeter, and I can set it to read volts, direct voltage. So I set it to 20 volts setting, so it's going to read anything up to 20 volts on this setting. So the battery should be, it's a 12 volt battery, so that should suffice. So I set it to read voltage, and I hook up the multimeter to my battery. So my battery is located here underneath the seat of the motorcycle. I've removed the seat, and I've just stuck the red terminal from the multimeter, red connector, to the positive terminal, which is located underneath this little red cover. So that's the positive terminal, and I have connected the black terminal of the multimeter to the negative terminal of the battery. So you can see here with the bike not running that the voltage is 12.58 volts, so it's about 12.6 volts. That's with the motorbike not running. Now when I start the motorcycle, you're going to see that the voltage drops initially, as starting the motorcycle drains quite a bit of current and the voltage drops initially. After that, you're going to see that the regulator rectifier should kick in, and it should start drop when the bike is running at idle. You should see a voltage in excess of 12.6 volts applied across the battery and being read on the multimeter. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start revving the engine, and what you should see, if the regulator rectifier is working properly, is we should see the voltage starting to increase as I rev the engine. The voltage will keep increasing on the multimeter. I'm not 100% sure where it stops, but somewhere probably between 14.5 and 16 volts, it's going to stop increasing. And then as I keep revving the engine, you're going to see that the voltage stops increasing. So that's one of the first tests that you can do to check that the regulator rectifier is doing its job, and that the stator is working as well. So let's go ahead and let's start the motorcycle. So I'm just going to turn on the ignition. You can see that it has caused the voltage on the multimeter to drop. Let's see where it drops to, so about 11.9. Okay, and that's because the lights come on when I turn on the ignition on this motorcycle. So the dim lights come on, so that drains some current. So it's in around 11.9 volts. So now I'm going to start the motorcycle and we're going to see the voltage drop even more, and then we should see it once the motorcycle begins to sit at idle. We should see the voltage start to increase again. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can see there that when the engine is running at idle, the voltage on the voltmeter read around 14.3 volts. Now when I started to rev the engine through the rev range, you did notice that the voltage on the voltmeter went up only slightly. It went up as far as 14.4 volts. And as I kept revving it more and more, the voltage stayed at 14.4 volts. So that indicates to me that the regulator rectifier on this motorcycle is working as it should. So it's charging the battery because the voltage when the motorcycle, the voltage across the terminals of the battery when the motorcycle is running is greater than the voltage of 12.6 or 12.8 that it's reading now when the motorcycle is not running. And it's also regulating the voltage, making sure that the voltage does not go above 14.4 volts. So for the next test, I'm going to connect the multimeter to the negative terminal, or between the negative terminal of the battery and the lead that usually connects on to the negative terminal of the battery. So I'm connecting the multimeter in series with the negative terminal of the battery and the lead that connects on usually to the negative terminal. So as you can see, I've already disconnected the lead from the negative terminal of the battery, and I've just taken the black lead from the multimeter and I've just stuck it into connected it up with the negative terminal of the battery, and I've taken the red lead from the multimeter and I've connected it up with the lead that is usually connected onto the battery. So what this is measuring on the multimeter here, I have it actually set to measure milliamps. So it's going to measure current. So it's measuring the current. It's called the leakage current. Now I'm measuring direct current. I set it initially to the 5 amps range, and I measured to see what amperage was coming from the battery to the lead. It indicated close to 0, so let me just put it back to 0 here briefly. So as you can see, it's just measuring 0.00. So it's then safe to move on to the next range, which is measuring 200 up to 200 milliamps. And when I set it there, I can see that it's recording At the moment it's recording 62.4, 62.5. Now, this is measuring the leakage current. So the leakage current, what is that? So essentially, when your motorcycle is turned off, it should actually, there is still some circuits which are connected up to the battery in which current can still run. So one of them is little instruments in the panel, such as your clock. Even though you don't see it on the instrument panel, it is still measuring time. Things like the radiator fan are connected up as well. If you come to a stop and your motorcycle is too hot, and you turn off the motorcycle, you will hear the fan still running if the motorcycle still needs to be cooled down. And then one of the other circuits is one of the other components that's connected to the battery, as I mentioned before, is the regulator-rectifier. So this test, we want to measure or make sure that there is no current being drained from the battery by the regulator-rectifier. Now, 61.5 milliamps is actually quite high for a leakage current. So I need to determine which circuit is actually draining the current. But for this video, what I'm interested in is the regulator rectifier draining any current from my battery. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to disconnect the regulator rectifier from its connector, which feeds into the wiring loom, which is connected to the battery, and we're going to see, does the reading on the regulator rectifier change substantially when I disconnect the regulator rectifier from the wiring loom. Now, if we see a substantial drop in the leakage current, which is being read out here, then that indicates that the regulator rectifier is faulty. If we don't see a change in the leakage current, then that indicates that the regulator rectifier is not leaking current. So again, this test is essentially checking that the regulator rectifier is functioning as a diode. So by that I mean that it does not allow current to drain from the battery through the regulator rectifier to earth. So I'm going to go ahead now and just disconnect it, and you can keep an eye on the multimeter. So first of all, I just have to disconnect it here. So there's a little clip which I just have to lift up. Okay, so that's it disconnected. So as you can see, looking at the regulator rectifier, just as I pull out the connector, there is no substantial change in the leakage current. So this indicates that my regulator rectifier is not leaking current and it is working as a diode as it should.